In the first stanza of Psalm 119, the psalmist told us that blessing is found in walking according to the law of the Lord. But that first stanza also raised a really big problem. We can't do that. And so in the second stanza, the psalmist sort of picks up on that idea. Let me read verse 9 for us. How can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. Literally, the first half of that verse reads, how can a young man stay on the path of purity? That is, how can a young man walk according to the law of the Lord? And while the psalmist could be talking about particular struggles that young men experience, I think it's much more likely that he's talking about himself. How can I as a young man, I as who I am, do this? This is a struggle he knows he has. As one commentator has said of this verse, the psalmist is praying, not preaching. And of course, this is a struggle that middle-aged women and retired gentlemen have as well. This is a psalm that speaks to and speaks for all of us. It's just that that's not where the psalmist is. So we can be clear that for all of us, blessing is found in living according to the Lord's word. But as we saw back in verses 1 to 8, we can't do that by ourselves. But the rest of this stanza shows us how. In verses 10 to 12, we see how it is possible for us to live according to the law of the Lord. And then in verses 13 to 16, that experience of life lived according to God's word is described for us. But first, how is it possible? Well, it's possible by God's grace. When he, as the second half of verse 10 says, does not let us stray from his commands. You see, we can do this when God keeps us on the straight and narrow. And it's possible when he, in the second half of verse 12, teaches us his decrees. And here, teach just doesn't just mean impart information so we know the right answers in a Bible study. It means bringing about formation so that we live the right way, even when no one is watching. Now, of course, it's a two-way street. We are to, as the first half of verse 10 says, seek him, the Lord, with all our hearts. We're to, verse 11, hide his word in our hearts, that we might not sin against him. But if we didn't have his grace, well, we'd be done for. We'd be utterly forsaken, in the words of verse 8 at the end of the first stanza. But when that grace is at work in our lives, helping us to live the blessed life, it is wonderful. Here's how the psalmist responds to that grace in verses 13 to 16. I'm going to read them again. With my lips I recount all the laws that come from your mouth. I rejoice in following your statutes as one rejoices in great riches. I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. You get it, don't you? The psalmist, he's overflowing with wonder, with amazement, with praise at how good it is by God's grace to live God's way. And if that could have been true of the psalmist who lived in anticipation of Jesus Christ and the new life that he would bring, how much more true is it of the Christian in whose heart Christ dwells through faith? So as we come to the end of this stanza, why not pray Pray that you would know God's grace in your life as he helps you to follow his word. Why not commit before the Lord to hide his word in your heart and then look forward to knowing the blessing that comes as you live according to it.